Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ma'am, I hope that I'm audible. Could you check your mic once, please?
Good evening, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are perfectly audible. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, ma'am. We will start our event just now because we should be on time. People have joined in, and there are people also who are joining from YouTube and Facebook. So it's a privilege to have you with us today, ma'am. Today's event. We welcome all the guests, all the members who have joined, and a few students who have joined too. We welcome you to this 9th edition of the Members Forum that we are doing, and fortunately for us, with all the support of our members, we are getting at least one member every week who would like to speak on this forum. We have already got a few very interesting topics that have been discussed, starting from serious topics to topics like tourism. So it's nice sessions that we are having, and we would welcome more participation to this. With that, we would request Dr. Nilanjana Sinha, who is the guest speaker today, to kindly take us through this session on ESG pros and cons. Ma'am, it's all up to you, and if you could kindly enlighten us on this issue that you have been talking about.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I hope I can keep up to the expectations that the group has with respect to the session we are having. Okay. Whenever I have discussed about this concept of ESG, a very common thing which I face is many people have heard the term, but actually they are not actually having an idea of what this concept is. So before moving into the pros and cons of the concept of ESG, I think a brief overview about the concept will be better, because we have a heterogeneous group of audience. So understanding what ESG is will help them to understand better of what are the pros and cons of the concept. Well, even if you have not heard about the concept of ESG, you might have heard about the concept called sustainability. Sustainability in today's date, it plays a very critical role in shaping the future of the world. Sustainable business practices, if we take into consideration, they are very vital, not only at the micro level from the organization's point of view, but also from the macro level, affecting the entire society as a whole. Organizations, they have a need is to balance between profit maximization at one side and minimize the negative effects. When I say negative effects, it means to strike a balance between the economy, the environment, and the society. But then what we find in today's scenario is that sustainability for the businesses has become more of a compliance. It is a mere responsibility which they try to fulfill rather than taking it as an opportunity to create it as a long-term or a long-run value. Especially in today's scenario, where we are facing a complete geopolitical tensions all around. We have the global COVID pandemic, recessions, we have rising health issues, we are having extreme health weather conditions all around. In such a case, incorporating sustainability into the business has become a very corporate imperative thing. But then I'll just, before coming into the concept of ESG, I would like to discuss of some of the very classic examples or cases which we all know, but it's just a recap of those cases before we actually enter into the concept. This is the example of Exxon Valdez oil spill of 1989, in which the oil tanker, which was actually heading to the Long Beach, California, it ran into a reef spill, and around 10.8 billion gallons of oil was spilling over. I'll just give you certain statistics to get an idea of the level of damage which it had done. It says that around 1,300 miles of coastline were hit by the oil spill. About $300 billion of economic harm was caused to more than 32,000 livelihoods dependent on the commercial fishing. The tourism sector, it decreased by 35% in Southwest Alaska in year after. The economic loss to the recreational fishing industry was of around 31 million. And even after 2 decades after the spill, the oil could still be found on half of the 91 randomly selected beaches which were surveyed. So just to give you an idea, It's not about what caused the damage, but what was the consequence, the environmental consequence that the stakeholders had to bear because of this incident. A similar incident was the Deepwater Horizon oil spill of 2010, where around 4 million barrels of crude oil had spilled over, and research says that even today, the oil has settled in the sea floor, and what is going to be the long-term effect of it is still unknown. This picture is very common to all of us and known to all of us. This is the Bhopal gas tragedy, which happened in the 1984, the leak of the methyl isocyanate gas from Union Carbide India factory. Now, the official figures used to say that the statistics of the death was 500, while unofficial statistics say that it was 3 times more than that. Question is not of the industrial disasters which happened, but it is actually how the government presented the case. The government, which was the sole legal representative of the victims, they actually had no experience of dealing with such a huge level of industrial disaster. And as a result, they had engaged the Washington law firm to deal with the case. The Union Carbide division, they had tried out many tactics. They came up with sabotage cases. They came up saying that this can be a case of natural disaster. They also said that this can be a case of conspiracy by the Sikh extremists, because of which the gas leak happened. At the end of it, the solution was they had to pay a $470 million compensation to the dependents of the dead and the chronically ill people, and around $160 million to the government agencies for rehabilitation of the victims. But the question is not of the compensation. The question is what happened to the victims and how long it took for the economy, for the environment to come back to normal. These cases which you saw, they were some of the historical cases. But if I look into the present scenario hasn't changed even bit. What you're seeing, the picture on the left-hand side at the top, that is the Belandur Lake at Bengaluru, which often catches fire. The reason is accumulation of toxic wastes, which are released by the factories. Sterlite expansion plan of Vedanta Group. There's a very interesting, if you know the case of it, it initially had plans to set up the factory in Maharashtra. But then, since they did not get a clearance from there, so within 1 year, they shifted and the factory was opened up in Tamil Nadu. Okay, and the place is what we call as Thuthukudi. Okay, now what happened is, there were certain rules and regulations with respect to no objection that had to be given to these areas. Now, it was said there that they had to carry out a EIA, that is a environment impact assessment, according to which there were certain regulations, like the factory location cannot be within the 25 kilometers from the Gulf of Mannar. But then the factory was set up within 14 kilometers of the Gulf. Secondly, it was said that when you are setting up, the production amount cannot be more than 70,000 tons per annum, but their manufacturing was 175,000 to 42 tons per annum of copper anode. So you can understand the level of violations which were done. But the strange fact was that even after those violations, they did not have a problem in getting the no objection from the Pollution Control Board. The localites have been suffering from ill health. Agriculture had affected in those areas, the climate got affected, but then the more the people complained, the deaf were the political parties. As a result, what happened is in 2018, the Sterlite Group had applied for an expansion of the plant. They said that they want to now go for an expansion of the plant, and they want to go for a capacity of around 8 lakh tons per year. That means it would be the largest smelter complex in the urban city. This is where the local people agitated. And the agitation got to such an extreme that the police firing were there. There were a number of people who were killed, number of injured, hospitalized, and so on. Now, I'll come to some more cases. Like suppose if we take the 2012 Maruti case, which happened. Now, this case, if you see, this was a case where we had the local people, the local workers. It was basically a problem of the union. where in the Manesa factory, which was actually having 1/3 of the company's total output was produced in this factory. It started with a small dispute between the labor workers and the employees, and it resulted into a violence and a riot where the factory was burned. One of the HR personnel was burned alive. There were hundreds of management personnel who were injured, and more than 30 convicted. Now, the moral of the story here is, if you see, it was the union of Maruti and Suzuki. So naturally, two different cultural environments came together. The Japanese cultural environment merging with the Indian cultural environment. The cultural difference does play a very big role when it comes to official working. Apart from there was a huge amount of relentless pressure of being a volume player for the company. And a big problem which was faced that time was that there was a cutting back of contractual workers. At one side, the contractual workers' salary was very less, which was actually 1/3 of the full-time workers. At the same time, they were completely being replaced by permanent workers. So this led to the agitation, and from there, this is where the mishap took place. Now, the violence took place, but the violence somewhere damaged India's appeal to the investors, especially to the automobile sectors. Now, this is the case of Nestle. Now, not only Nestle, if you take into consideration any of the confectionery companies, be it Hershey or be it Mondelez, you will find that there's a common problem in all these companies, which is happening, that is the allegation of involving underage working children who are being recruited through trickery, trafficked across the border to the cocoa farms. They are forced to work for years with either no salary or low salary. They are kept in pathetic conditions. Now, these are certain social issues, or you can say labor issues of harsh working conditions. And it's not only limited to these confectionery companies. If I take the MNCs like Amazon, McDonald's, or maybe say Nike, or if I take even the local players, like suppose if we take in Kolkata or in Bengal, if I take suppose the plantations, tea plantations in Darjeeling, if I take the jute mills which are there in Hooghly, or maybe the coal mining which is there in Bihar, you will find problems of ergonomic hazards, problems of wage theft, failing to provide proper meals, proper wages, are very common. Now, this is a news clipping of the Adani group at Mundra. Mundra is one area which was actually famous for date cultivation. But then the pollution level has gone to such an extent that the farmers there have actually fled because no more is the date cultivation possible there. Now, if I talk about the pollution board, again, the same situation, the same story. They are allowing the companies to go on. Now, from the companies or from the government point of view, if I see, it is a balance between whether I want to go for industrialization or whether I want to go for sustainability. And it is being found that yes, companies or these organizations, I mean the politicians, they are somewhere giving more importance to the industrialization because somewhere that is what is going to give them an ROI. But then the question still remains the same. Where are we landing up? In terms of governance issues, if you remember the Yes Bank, it was one of the examples where one of the organizations which, if we talk from the period, say 2008 to 2015, it was having a rapid expansion where there was an aggressive level of corporate lending, which it is used to do to the renewable energy companies, to the real estate, to the pharmaceuticals, to the media sectors. Some of the area companies which they had invested in was like Cafe Coffee Day, Reliance Telecom, Z Entertainments. But then by 2018-19, when these organizations were having a sinking, they also led to the sinking of Yes Bank. And this is the time when RBI actually entered into the picture because what they found was that the asset quality review, the NPA declared by Yes Bank was not actually what it was. The figure which the RBI has computed, that was around 50,000 million, which was actually 7 times less of what the company had declared. So such misclassifications of the bad loans. Apart from that, if you remember, Shagun Gogoi, who was actually the daughter of Ashok Kapoor, who had actually expired, she wanted to be one of the members of the board. But then Rana Kapoor, he actually didn't wanted this thing to happen, and he wanted the shares to be non-promoter status. But then these somewhere brought into the question of governance. Facebook is a very common example we have, where the concept of data privacy has been an issue, especially the 2018, the large-scale data breach scandal, which they had, where, if you remember the brand, the Cambridge Analytica, which was in collaboration with the Global Science Research, they had harvested personal psychographic data using some personality test application. The name of the application was "This is Your Digital Life." And around 87 million users, without their consent, data was taken and was manipulated for political purpose. And this is not the first time it happened with Facebook. If you remember, in 2006, they had come up with a feature called Newsfed, which was actually tracking the personal friend list of each of the usagers. In 2007, they had come up with another feature called as a beacon system, which actually tracked the user's online purchase behavior. In 2013, they themselves confessed that there was a bug because of which personal details of around 6 million people, users, was circulated all across in a period of just 1 year. Now, there are many such cases. If you actually explore the history, or if you explore the Google, you will come across where you will find, like, suppose the Sahara case was there, where in 2012, it was a battle with SEBI, where raising of funds from public without the proper regulatory approval was the Uber allegations of toxic workplace. Now, all these cases, if we take into existence, they somewhere point the need for a proper, sustainable check to be made for the companies, because somewhere to address the need for having a check on the responsible investing is very much needed. And keeping that into perspective, many measures have been previously designed. There's a measure called socially responsible investment, which we call as the SRI. We have a common measure which we call CSR, that is the corporate social responsibility. We have green investing, corporate governance. But then somewhere the concept of ESG differs from them. Social responsible investing, it is a very focused investment where it does a negative screening or an exclusionary practice. Companies like which have a negative valuation, like in terms of tobacco company or alcohol company or a weapon company or a gambling company, it says that investment in such companies will not be done. You need to exclude them up. On the contrary, green investing concept, it says that invest in companies which have a positive, sustainable options like renewable energy, clean technology, energy efficiencies, waste management. CSR is one area which focuses on from the internal perspective. It's more of a philanthropic activity. It's voluntarily done. Although, as per the Companies Act, it has been said that 2% of the net profit has to be given into the CSR. But then this is still an activity which is not related to the external stakeholders. And this is the gap which this concept of ESG is actually addressing. ESG says that there are two components. One is the goodness, which are measuring of a company, and second is the risk quotient. And it says that it is not only the financial data which is going to tell the performance of a company. Apart from the financial data, there are other quotients also which define the performance of a company, and that has been grouped into these three categories: E for environment, S for the social, and G for the governance. Now, in terms of E, that is the environment, it tries to say that how does the company treat the environment? It includes the climate change. How is the company trying to reduce the carbon emissions? Is it doing anything for deforestation? Is it reducing the waste and pollutions? What it is doing to reduce the carbon footprints? In terms of social aspects, when we are talking about, ESG concept says that a company is accountable not only to the shareholders, it has to extend beyond that. Your accountability is to the stakeholders, and that also not only the internal, but also the external stakeholders. What do I mean by that? I have to be accountable to my employees. I have to provide a proper working culture. I have to be accountable to my suppliers, my consumers, and also the community. So naturally, what comes under that? If you have seen or explored any of the ESG reports of the companies, you will find that how much of the workforce is women, or percentage of workforce in your organization is women, or how much of the workforce are the localized people of your area. Such data are given priority to. In terms of data privacy, what steps are being taken by the organization? In terms of health and safety measures, what steps are taken by the organization? So all those aspects are being covered by the social aspect. And governance, when we talk about, it basically talks about the transparency that the organization is. It is how the company is being run. It talks about the leaderships, it talks about the shareholders' right, the board of governance, about the different diversities in the board of governance, the audit, everything. Now coming to the pros and cons of the concept of ESG. Now, if we talk about ESG, first and foremost thing is that this concept is about the non-financial aspect. It does not take the financial aspect into consideration. It says that beyond the financial aspect, also there is something to judge a company's performance on, right? So in this case, one of the benefits which we have of this ESG concept is it facilitates the top line growth. Now, this is just like a brand name. Once you have a brand name, you can leverage it in many aspects, right? You can have a higher price for the brand. You can have a good promotion scheme done for the brand. Many things work out. You can come up with a line extension for the brand or a brand extension for the brand. The brand name will fetch you that. Similarly, a strong ESG proposition helps you in that. A strong ESG proposition will help the company to tap new markets, to expand into the existing ones. It can help to achieve better access to resources through strong options. I'll give you an example in this case. If you talk about the brand called Sunlight. Sunlight had come up with an option for dishwashing liquid, and one of its advertisements said that you use less water than the other brands. If you're using the brand Sunlight for dishwashing, the amount of water which you require is very less. And the research found that those areas which had a scarcity of water, the brand had a higher sale by 20%. So naturally, we can say that ESG also derives the consumer's preference. In terms of cost reduction also, it helps. It's not always that since I'm going for an ESG scheme or I have to spend extra. Sometimes it leads to cost reduction also. I'll just give an example. FedEx as a brand, it has planned that all the vehicle fleets which it has, it is going to transform them into or modify them into the electric or the hybrid engines. They have just as of now converted only 20% of them, and because of that, the fuel consumption is reduced by 50 million gallons. So you can understand the level of cost reduction that can happen if a company goes for the ESG scheme. Another benefit which you're having if you're going for the ESG ratings is a reduced regulatory and legal intervention. What it means is that if you go for any research analysis, especially the McKinsey analysis, you will find that it states that 1/3 of the corporate profit, they are at the risk from the state interventions and external regulatory interventions. For example, if I take the pharmaceutical and the healthcare industry, around 25 to 30% of the corporate profits are at the stake from regulations of generic drugs. It can be the clinical trials, it can be the pricing. If I take the telecom and the media industry into consideration, you will find around 40 to 60% of the stakes are subject to tariff regulations, interconnections, fiber deployments, and data privacy, right? So it helps you to reduce the regulatory and the legal interventions. Obviously, the higher is the ESG score. In today's date, we find two segments who are very much interested in it. One is the investors and the one is the customers. Customers are willing to pay more to go for products which are having a high ESG score. And similarly, investors, they feel much more secure when they are spending money on the companies which are having a high ESG score. Now, how does that equation work? Now, The simple thing is that the companies which are going for green business practices, they have an attractive market valuation. And since the market valuation is higher, companies or investors are ready to invest more, customers are ready to purchase, or their loyalty shifts towards such brands. So there's a high demand for issued debt and equity. As a result, the cost of capital goes low, and so they get an option to invest in more projects. So we can say because of this that the risk utility, if we take that framework into consideration, companies which are having a low ESG score, they may have a high expected return, but they also have a high risk. The risk is in the sense that since they are not going for the sustainability options, or the sustainability rules and regulations are not being followed, so they have the chance of toppling down anytime. But the ones which are going for the high ESG scores, they may in the long run have a low expected return, but then their risk is also low. Their return is expected to be higher in the long term. Right? So companies with positive ESG, they track a record, are more likely to boost their reputation and ease concern of potential litigations. Now, coming to the dark side of the ESG. Now, if you have a reference to the YouTube presentations, Aswat Damodaran, he is a teacher of New York University. He has given in this, it's a very beautiful video where he says what are the dark shades of ESG. And he has in fact very strongly said that I think the concept should RIP. He says that ESG is a concept born in sanctimony, nurtured with hypocrisy, and sold with sophistry. Now, the gravy tray concept is both toxic and empty at the same time. Now, he has a certain logic behind saying such a strong statement. We are just going to go into and delve into those areas. Now, ESG as a picture, when I discuss about the green side, it seems very flowery. I'm having a high ESG, that means the consumer considers me good, the investor considers me good, they will invest in me, consumers will buy my products, my profits are going to rise, may not be in the short run, but in the long run. But then there are certain areas, other side of the coin, which also need to be explored. Now, ESG says you can be all good, but then the question is, if I have to be good, I have to pay the price of it? If you have to have any good habit in your lifestyle, just think in that sense. If you are going for a proper diet, don't you have to sacrifice something? But the concept of ESG says that it is only good with no consequence. Something very fuzzy as a concept. How can it be that I be good, but I do not have to sacrifice something? Or does it mean that I'm going for something called as the concept of greenwashing, where I am actually hiding something? I'm portraying something different, I am actually something different. Or maybe I'm going for cherry picking of data. I am actually just portraying before you in my ESG data the things which are good, and I am just hiding the ones which are bad. Or it can be I'm exaggerating the false advertisements before you. Or maybe I'm going for a diversionary tactic where I disclose all those informations which are very redundant. I may come up with so many philanthropic activities which I have done, so many data which actually make no sense. And I come up with a disclosure of say 70 or 80 pages. So somewhere there's not a foundational to the company's strategy. ESG is a strategic deal, no doubt, but it is something like saying that ESG is only for goodness, is something like saying that it's a cake which has no calories, which is not possible, right? So it is more to the organizations a PR move which they are taking. It gets in the way of what business is, because business at the end of the day, you have to understand it is making money while conforming to the basic rules of the society. If that is so, then how can both work together? That is, I do all the good with no consequence. So that is one of the very dark sides of ESG which is not addressed. The second very important aspect of ESG is that it claims to measure something that's not measurable on the global scale. Now, what does this mean? it says that implicit in the ESG is assumption that there is a consensus of what comprises good and that goodness is measurable. Now the question is, how do I measure goodness? If I ask any one of you, tell me how do you define a good person? Your way of defining a good person may be different from that of mine. For me, a person who maybe goes to the office in the morning at time and returns back home at time is a good person. For another, maybe he stays anywhere at night, doesn't make a difference. But then he should be helpful to others in times of need. So the definition of, when I'm talking about the rating or how to measure the concept of goodness, that is completely personal, that cannot be subjective. It varies from industry to industry, it varies from geography to geography, it varies from person to person. But what happens is that, how is the ESG measured by these organizations? There are certain rating agencies. Okay, we have 5-6 major rating agencies, like for example, the Bloomberg, we have MSCI, we have sustainability. Now, each of these organizations have their own way of measuring. Now, the big question is, you are measuring something on a global scale. Suppose I'm measuring the ESG of a IT company in India versus a FMCG company in US. Can I use the same yardstick? It cannot happen. I'll just show you some of the statistics. This is MSCI, the methodology which they use for rating the organizations. They have a score. They say that an organization which scores AA or AAA, that's a leader. An organization which scores B or CCC, that's a laggard. And anything which falls between is an average. And how do they compile the data? So I'll just give an idea about this. They do not go for any questionnaires. It's basically the standardized method to assess the company's risk exposure. For that, what they do, it's industry-specific key issues are scored on a 0 to 10 scale using a rules-based methodology, on the basis of which they do the scoring. And from where do they get the data? They have around 3,400 media sources from which they are getting the data. They assign a percentage weight to each of the ESG scores, risks, according to their assessment of time horizon, and accordingly they make the calculation. What you're seeing on the right side, this is actually the score of Thomson Reuters. Just a moment. No, this is of Moody's ESG view, where they have given different scores. Like they evaluate environment on a 5-point scale. They evaluate the social on a, again, 5-point scale, and governance on a 5-point scale. And the parameters which they use, just for your perusal, like in terms of environment, it is the physical climate risk, the carbon transmission, the water management, natural capital, waste and pollution. In terms of the social, they take the customer relations, the demographic trends, the health and safety, human capital, responsible. And the question which comes here is, before I come to the question, I'll just show you another statistics. This is that of the Thomson Reuters. This is another rating agency. They have two measures. One is the Thomson Reuters ESG score, where the measure is on the base of the report data which is there in the public domain. Based on that, they do the calculation. And another calculation is on the basis of the controversy score, where whatever media reports, especially the negative reports, which are there, the negative media stories which come out in the market, they discount the ESG scores based on the negative media scores. And they have around, if you have a look, they have around 400 ESG measures on the basis of which they are doing the calculation. Now, each rating agency has a different way of calculating, which varies from that of the other. So how do I standardize? This is a very major problem with the ESG ratings. As an investor, if you're investing in a company which has a high ESG rating, the question comes is on the basis of what is the ESG rating that? Individually, if you say ESG, you're assessing, that still can be considered. But the aggregate score, if you take into consideration, that actually has very little meaning. The weighting and the methodology, if we take into consideration, adopted across the varied ESG rating agencies are not the same. In fact, one of the research studies has also shown that the ESG rating and the scores which are provided, they actually correlate only 54%. And the range varies from 38 to 71%, right? I'll just give you an example of some of the organizations and their ESG scores, which varies. Sustainalytics has one score. Refinitiv, MSCI has different scores for the same company. So how to rely and which one to go for? So this becomes one of the, again, a big problem with the ESG. There's one more quotient, that is the S quotient, which we say the social quotient. Now, if you remember the cases which we discussed about the Adani group, or maybe about the Maruti or the Sterlite, where we found at one side we have the court, which is giving a stay order, and the other side we find the government giving them no objections. So which side of the social divide makes you good? Who decides it? Now, ESG as a scheme, it has been originated from the United Nations. So if you talk about the capitalists, they are the ones who favor it. If I talk about the socialists, they consider it to be a dark shade. So where does the S quotient stand? The problem is with the S quotient is they are inclined, or there's the link of the political aspect is aligned with them. So when you are linking the ESG, all the three components together, what happens is that it just becomes like an eye wash. It is just an aid, which it's a gesture of goodness, but not actual goodness. What the company is actually doing and what it is showing, there's two different things. Another big problem with ESG ratings is that they come up with disclosures, which you can see is disclosure diarrhea. The reports of these organizations, if you see, it starts with around 70 pages, 80 pages. Some of the company reports goes to 200 pages. But the question comes is who actually reads them? Companies disclose more because they know the more I disclose, the less my consumers or the investors are going to read. And the second question is, what am I disclosing? If Facebook says to me that I am disclosing information about carbon footprint, so I am a transparent organization. My question is, am I interested to know about the carbon footprint of FB? Or am I interested to know what is the data privacy, or how are they taking or handling the data privacy issue? So what data is the company disclosing, and how much data is actually redundant, how much of it is important? That is also very much important. Now, coming to the ESG and the financial performance, does it always mean that a company which has a high ESG score is a good financial performance organization? Need not be. To just give an example, if we talk about the rating of different colleges and schools when it is done, there are different ways in which the ratings can be done. Statistics is something I can, it's something to be played with. How I use it is completely up to me. So how do I give the data? How do I do the calculation? On the basis of that, I can get a ESG score. It's not necessary that actually my performance in terms of ESG has to be good enough. ESG makes managers accountable to not merely the shareholders, but also stakeholders. Now, this is one of the negative points. The reason for this is that I can be accountable to one person, I can be accountable to two persons, but when you make me accountable to all, I am actually not accountable to none. That's why we say that when people are accountable to everyone, they are accountable to no one. Now, what happens is that, for example, if there is a revenue and if there's a profit in your organization, the question is, with whom will you share the profit? Would you share the profit with the customers in the form of, say, low price? Or would you prefer to share that with your employees in the form of high wages? Or would you want to share that with your suppliers in the form of, say, high commission to them? Or would you think, no, it's something which I would give back to the environment in the form of internal carbon tax? Which is the optimal choice? How does the company take a decision? That is what ESG makes managers accountable. That's why this concept of being accountable to the shareholders, it is very risky. You're either accountable to all, you're not accountable to anyone. Another problem with the ESG scheme is with a different value system. Now, it's more about sounding good than doing good. Now, generally, it has been fine. If you look into the statistics, you will find the company, the big top shot companies, they have a high ESG score. Now, with this comes another problem also, that is the causation direction, which tries to say is that, does it mean that companies which have high profitability, which are the top shot companies, they are the ones who have a high ESG, or is it the vice versa? Is it the companies, ESG companies, that are profitable, or is it the vice versa? Now, this is something just like if I say, does higher price or higher purchase of whole food means that you're a richer person, or is it the other way around? That is, the people who are rich, they go for whole food consumption. So the direction of causation is something which is again to be thought about. Now, what is appearing is that there are many organizations who actually do not go for a good ESG practice, but then they have a high score. So this is basically a money-making game, or is it actually an eyewash? So the differential value system somewhere points out to that aspect. So that is it. I try to keep it as short and simple as possible. Do you have any questions?
Okay, there's one question. Though I'll read the question, but still I would like to ask if there's anyone who would like to ask the question personally. You can raise your hand. We'll try to give you the permission to speak. In the meantime, it is asked by Mr. Joydeep Ghosh, how ESG is related to COP.
Pardon me?
How ESG is related to COP.
COP. Can you just tell me the full form of the COP, sir?
Joydeep, if you could just do that. Anyone else with any questions? By the time Joydeep comes back with, okay, Manjunatha Vijay. Just a minute, we'll give you the chance. Yeah, you can unmute yourself. Manjunatha Vijay, M. Vijay, is there a question that you would like to ask? Okay, Joydeep is actually referring to the COP26 event that is going to happen. So, is there any relevance or connection between the two, ESG and COP26 summit, something, ma'am?
I'll have to go through that. I'm not very much conversant with that aspect.
That is basically something I understand. Joydeep will come back with the answer. You would get that answer, if not today, sometime later. Just to ask anyone else if you have any more questions. Ma'am, just Ram. Okay, Ram Babu, you can ask your question, please.
Good evening, madam. This is Ram Babu here. It was a very wonderful session. You started with the concept for you, the people who are not have idea about ESG, and very excellently put as an overall scenario. My one question is, as you said, the conclusion part, is it really money making or eyewash? You know, if in a company or corporate, if you take stakeholders, when you talk, we have a shareholders, management, customers, suppliers, staffs, banks, and so on. Obviously, each stakeholder's interest in the performance of the company differs. But whereas when you talk about the one side is the business as a the company, other side the regulatory body. So as of now, is there any mandatory, or can you please highlight on that, please?
Mandate in the sense, sir, ESG still now, it has not been made completely mandatory. What it has been said is that the top 100 organizations, if I'm not wrong, they have to go for this ESG as per the 22-23. This is what the SEBI guidelines has come up with. Now, the problem is, see, since organizations, you cannot be out of the race. You cannot be an outlier. You have to be a part of the crowd, right? So organizations are going for the ESG, and the number of ESG ratings or the reports which are there, which they are coming up, the numbers is increasing. The reason is because everyone wants to go with the flow, right?
Yeah.
So, and the thing is, investors are, that it is making a difference. Obviously, investors are investing in companies which are having a good ESG, or which are having an ESG score, or which are coming up with ESG reports. So that is making a difference. The question is, the difference, is it at the superficial level, or is the difference at the internal level? Because the concept sounds very good, but then to make that change happen, it cannot happen in the short run. It's going to take a long run. Obviously, environment is going to get benefited if the thing actually happens in practice, if the social changes happen. But then how many of the organizations are there to give priority or give time to look into those, keeping their business aside?
Is it similar to, we can put it, for example, we have a credit rate in like the Trisal, Likra, and
Right.
is similar to that, the concept that you mean, the ESG also?
Yeah, this is also a rating, but then again, the thing is, the rating, the main problem with the rating system as of now is with the standardization of the rating. Because I cannot have a pharmaceutical company being rated on the same parameters as an FMCG company. I cannot have a IT company rated the same way as an education institution. So if when you're rating, every institution should have a different parameter. Every organization has a different parameter. And when I'm taking governance into consideration, governance of India may not be the same as the governance of New Zealand. So that also has to be taken into consideration. Now, the thing is any rating organization, till now, none of the rating organization has gone to such an in-depth level to do an analysis.
Yes, I got it, madam. So, but for example, if you take a big group of companies, they have various business vertical. So in that scenario, it's all more critical, you know.
Exactly.
For example, group level, they have a manufacturing, they have a pharmaceutical in terms of business line. When you say each has its own speciality, there is no, you know, common yardstick or parameter by which we can compare. It's all the more complication when you do at a group consolidation, which has multiple domain. Am I right, ma'am?
Agreed, sir. Very true.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you, madam.
Thank you, Rambabu. That was a very interesting question. Yeah, in fact, this standardization is something we are still looking at. Just one, just to tell Mr. Ghosh that Jadip Ghosh will come back with your answer, but I understand this COP26, which Jadip is talking about, is more about climate, you know, those climate change and the government policies on climate change, which has happened in England and Italy last time. So
I would just like to say one thing. When you're talking about this climate change factor, there's a question which comes up, is that who is going to decide about this climate change denomination? Is it the organization? Is it the ESG rating organization? Or is it the society in terms of certain laws which are going to be built? So there again, the question comes, right?
That is true. That is true. So I think that needs to be looked into in a more detailed manner. In the meantime, I can see Dr. Shampa Chakraborty asking a question. Wants to ask a question. Let me check. Yeah, ma'am, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Good evening.
Good evening. And congratulations, you've done a wonderful job, Nilanjana. It was a very, very inspiring session, and we learned a lot. Actually, we have not gone into the depth of ESG before. It is a new concept. I just wanted to ask one thing, that the rating agencies you talked about, who are going to rate the ESG factor for organizations. So how equipped are these agencies to do this rating, and who gives them the parameters to rate, and who judges the rating agencies? Can you just highlight on that a bit?
Okay, ma'am, organizations like SEBI, they are the ones who have given them the freedom. But then the question is, I wouldn't use the word freedom exactly. It's basically they need a sanction for that. As far as the parameters are concerned, the parameters are decided by the organization themselves. Now, like if you had seen the presentation, Thomson Reuters has set a completely different denomination of parameter where they are saying we have total 400 aspects which we look into consideration. Now, these 400 aspects, they do not look into consideration for all the organizations. Based on the organization, they divide maybe for specific organizations, they may take 124 and all. Now, who is going to rate the rating agencies? This is a question which comes up, right? Now, as of now, there hasn't been any such authorities who are just rating these agencies. But then what happens is that these are the brands which you like sustainability. If you talk about MSCI, if you talk about Bloomberg, if you talk about, these are the agencies which have a setup, and the big companies, they are actually going to these agencies. So it's selling. The concept is selling.
Okay, so for instance, if I look at very large multinationals like Meta and Facebook, so they are the ones who are going into this ESG concept and they are being rated, or how does it? How does the sector-wise segmentation happen? How does it? How are the industries segmented? Sector-wise, or how is it done?
Ma'am, I'll just show you the PPT once, if you just allow me. Just have a look at this one. They are taking there's a research by McKinsey on this, how these groupings are done. Like for example, in terms of environmental, Thomson Reuters is using resource use, emission, innovation. For resource use, if you see, there are 20 parameters they're using. For emission, they're using 22 parameters. For innovation, they're using 19 parameters, right? This is how the parameters are there. Now, out of these 20 parameters, which will be selected for, say, for FB, or which are selected for, say, Infosys as a company, that is completely decided by Thomson. Now, how do they decide it? There, again, the concept varies. Like, for example, if you see MSCI says that we take the public opinion into the public domain aspects into consideration, right? But on the other hand, if I take MSCI, Moody's ESG, they have their self-decided parameters for risk, which they take into consideration on the basis. So either it's self-decided or it's on the basis of the public forum from where they are collecting the data. It's not questionnaire-based data which they are collecting.
Okay. So how statistically correct are these these data which are being taken from the public?
Ma'am, this is one question. Ma'am, I'm sorry interrupting you before you're completing.
Collected census has a lot of missing. Yeah.
Exactly. Ma'am, a few months back, I had actually, in one of my research papers, I was working on this ESG data, and I found that Adani Group is having a very high scoring, right? And within a few months, just a few days back, when I was doing the same calculation, their scores have come down. Now, this scoring is obviously varying with the market fluctuations. Because if I take the internal picture into consideration, the internal picture hasn't changed a lot in the 6 months, right? But then it goes with the flow. That's why I said the companies which are having a high profit, is it that those companies are getting a high ESG score? So is that an eyewash in that manner? I'll just show you a ESG report which will give you an idea. Just give me 1 minute.
And also in these, these companies like Moody, which are, worldwide, we know that they are doing this sort of, they track the companies. Is there any element of political
Exactly.
manipulation? Yeah.
Ma'am, it's absolutely there. But needless to say, political influence has a big role to play when it comes to these scores. Because when I was doing Tata is one organization, I found that ESG scores of the Tata Motors was not so high enough, which was actually strange to me. But then I somewhere found that yes, compared to Adani Group, Tata are doing less. It's something it brings into question. This is one of the ESG reports which the company comes out with.
Okay.
Okay. I'll show you this Adani Power. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Now see the information, like I was talking about the disclosures which these companies come up with, right?
Okay.
They have the vision and values, they have about the group, they have about the operational efficiency, they're talking about the creation models, awards, accolades. Now, how much of this information is actually relevant for me to decide about the company?
Also, how much is correct? Who's going to
they can also be fabricated, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if you see, most of it is not in the form of an essay. So,
it's not objectivity, means there's more subjective point to it.
It's not objective, right?
In fact, it's not possible also, because the social issues, if we take into consideration, we cannot quantify them. They have to be qualitative.
That is true. That is true. Yeah. So a lot of subjectivity comes in. But anyway, I think it's a good attempt at, going into the next level, considering that we are now, going into digital and we are going into a lot of, technical innovations. I think this is a good, aspect which we should also ponder about.
I feel it is not exactly like a Chrysler report or that report, which is actually unilateral. Means everyone for the same sector, they are having some standardized, as you said, the standardized, denominators or parameters to look into. Here, it seems that it is basically this can change. Means, as you said,
exactly.
This can change. Means a public opinion changes of the company.
Absolutely,
the parameters change.
You're right. Thank you so much, Nilanjana.
Thank you.
Congratulations once again. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. So I think just the last thing. We do have CSR concept in India still going on. There is a compulsory CSR contribution that every company has to do. Do you think in future this ESG might be used, or is there any country where it is used as a parameter, like CSR activities are used as a parameter? You have to do it and show it to the government. You have to show it to your stakeholders, shareholders.
Actually, it depends completely on the government. Because if the government makes it like mandatory, then obviously every company has to come up with a compliance report. Otherwise, it is something like a fad, which you have so many compliances which come up, they go away. So similarly, ESG also doesn't seem to be having the concept is undoubtedly good, but then the base is very weak enough. So that way, until and unless the government puts a backup that yes, it has to be there mandatory, it might be a fad.
Nice to do. It's good. Ms. Ma'am, but to finish with, I would say it was a very interesting session. There were many things that we had never known about it. And exactly as you said, ESG is something we have been hearing from here and there. Even we do it in Addas, Bengali Addas, it starts with, there's ESG, there's something. Now I get some few more points for my Adda. But the most important thing I found in whatever you have said is you have not been biased in any manner. You have not shown that it is too good or it is too bad. You have balanced your talk so very well that we exactly understand where we stand in the matters of ESG and how we can really take it forward. We can really have it as a positive parameter. We can take it as a understanding of how a company does. Or we can also think about how it is, there are different hindrances of using this as something we portray of a company. Like Tata Motors, you said, has not a very good ESG report. So, but that doesn't stop us from taking a Tata car. So thanks a lot. That was very interesting. I really liked this session, and there were a few questions which are very interesting. Just to thank you once again. The NSHM though is our partners now, and we'll be working very closely for the next 1 year together with utilizing your resources, that is NSHM resources, for the events of CMA and vice versa. So we look forward to those sessions in future.
Thanks to you for giving me the opportunity. Thanks to all the participants for the motivation. For me also, it was a good experience. Thank you once again.
It was very nice. I would like to attend one of your classes, ma'am. Would like to be a student of yours once again.
My honor.
It was very nice listening to you. Thanks a lot. Thanks to everyone. And for everyone, the participants, you know very well that I'll be showing you the e-certificate and e-feedback link. So please be with us, and we'll show it back to you. So thanks a lot. We'll log off in 2 more minutes. Thanks for joining. Thank you, ma'am, once again. And we'll have another session next week, and we'll be announcing that on our website. So please stay connected. Thank you.